Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Feely. So in today's video, we're going to be comparing the brand new Canon R50 with the older camera that this was replacing, the M50 and the M50 Mark II. But mostly I'm going to be focusing on the Mark II of the M50. Not going to be really comparing it to the first one since, you know, it just makes more sense to compare it to the Mark II. But before we get started, I know you guys are kind of noticing something a little bit different about this whole set. Like, there's just something different about me, right? I'll give you guys a second to figure it out. Thank you guys so much for noticing, but yes, I did get a new black shirt. So I think it fits really nicely compared to all my other black shirts. So I'm really proud of it. So thank you guys for noticing. But with that said, let's get right into the video. All right, so for those who are not aware, the R50 recently came out and it was basically like a replacement for the M50. So the M50 and the M50 Mark II are some of Canon's most popular characters, I still think, up to this day, because it's like a really great beginner's camera that, you know, covers a lot of bases. Really takes great photos, it takes great video, it has access to basically the entire EF and EFS line via lens adapter. So really following up the M50 with the R50 has like very big shoes to fill. So I'm just gonna go through all the different points where it's different. So R50 versus M50 Mark II. So let's get right into it. There's no like really order of this. I'm just kind of going based off the notes I wrote. So let's start with the sensor. So the R50 has a 24.2 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor and the Digic 10 processor, while the M50 Mark II has a 24.1 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor with a Digic 8 processor. And it feels like yesterday when they released the Digic 8, because I remember talking about the M50 versus the M6 and talking about the processor. But yeah, you basically have two whole numbers in processing power compared to the R50. And I do notice a little bit of a difference. We recently shot a wedding and I did notice that the R50 was just a little bit more snappier. I went to the M50, granted the Mark I, I switched with my sister who was also helping out in the wedding. I did notice there was a little bit of a difference in the processing when it came to the 10 versus the 8 in the M50 and then the 10 in the R50. So it is a noticeable difference. So you are getting a newer and more updated processor on the R50. So let's get into ISO range. The R50 has a 100 to 32,000 ISO range that expands to about 51,200, while the M50 Mark II has a 100 to 25,600 ISO range and expanded, it goes up to the same 51,200. Not much to comment on that, but the R50 does have a little bit more of an ISO range, so that's that. Now here's where one of the big differences between the M50 and the R50 really happened. So the R50 in terms of autofocus now has 4,503 point dual pixel CMOS autofocus 2 with 651 zones, while the M50 Mark II has 3,975 point dual pixel CMOS autofocus with 25 zones. So the R50 has at least one whole generation's worth of autofocus improvements compared to the M50 Mark II. So where the M50 Mark II added eye tracking in their autofocus, the R50 adds several more. So head tracking, body tracking, animal, and even vehicle tracking. And you can even tell the difference between a car and a motorbike. So you can see that they improved the autofocus quite a bit. And I did notice that quite a bit on the R50. It just knew exactly where the eyes were, or if I set it to like just to do a general face, boom, it just knew where the face was. So it's really like snappy when it comes to the autofocus. All right, so next up we have continuous shooting. The R50 has a 12 frames per second and electronic first curtain, 42 JPEG and 7 RAW, and a 15 frames per second electronic, 28 JPEG and 7 RAW, while the M50 Mark II has 10 frames per second and 36 JPEG and 10 RAW. So you're limited to 12 frames per second when you're using the R50's electronic first curtain shutter mode, which is where the exposure ends when the first rear curtain closes. So very slight improvement on the R50. Next up we have the video. So this is the one side of it that I really appreciated all the upgrades to this. So the R50 has a full width 4K 30p oversampled from 6K and up to 1 hour of recording, while the M50 Mark II has a cropped 4K with 24p and no dual pixel autofocus in 4K. So with the M50 and the M50 Mark II, they didn't do many video improvements in between those two cameras in terms of video. If you don't know, I've talked about this before before, the M50 and the M50 Mark II have a 1.6 times crop whenever you go in 4K, and you also lose dual pixel autofocus when you go into 4K too. So it kind of makes the 4K a little bit less useful, and it might be useful for those who are, need a little bit more zoom. It does crop in, so you are getting a little bit closer. Say you're trying to get something that's far away, that's great for that. But in general, for vlogging, it's just not useful because it just crops so close to your face. And tacking on like stabilization on the camera, putting that on, it just pretty much, you just have like eyes in the frame. With the R50, which is really good, is that there's no crop on the 4K, and in addition to that, they added 30 frames per second, which is really nice, and dual pixel autofocus. So at this point, the 4K is actually usable, no crop, and you can shoot in 30 frames, which is absolutely great. And that's one of the features I really look forward to on this. And what's great is that they sample it down from 6K, which is always great. Now, another thing they also improved on the R50 is that they raised the recording limit on the camera. So on the M50 and the M50 Mark II, they capped it at 30 minutes when it came to video recording. And I've had some people say that if you plug it into a wall, you can get an adapter where it plugs in directly here. You can plug it into a wall, it can record longer than 30 minutes. That was never the case for me. I never experienced that. It always cut off at 30 minutes. And believe me, I've taken plenty of video with that camera to know that it stops at 30 minutes. So I don't know what these people are talking about. But on the R50, at least, they raised it to at least 1 hour. Now that comes with a little bit of caveats, because on any other mode from 60 frames below, you go up to 1 hour of recording time. But as soon as you put it up to like 120 frames, it drops it down to like 15 minutes. But who's taking 15-minute videos in 120 frames per second? Not me. So I don't really care about that. Raising the recording limit to 1 hour is definitely a welcome improvement, but I would have just liked it if they just completely removed the recording limit. But I also want to mention that even though they raised it up to a 1 hour recording limit, there are going to be some things that's going to stop your recording before it even gets to 1 hour. So one thing that can stop you is storage on your SD card. It could easily fill that up. So make sure you have the biggest SD card you can find and then start recording. Another thing that can happen is that your battery just dies while you're recording. And last but not least, it could also overheat from just recording for so long. So those are some factors that's gonna inevitably cause you not to reach that 1 hour recording limit, but what can you do, right? So let's get into lenses. The R50 has the RF mount, and they recently released the RFS lens line, which is the APS-C lenses for their RF mount line of cameras. So basically all their mirrorless cameras notated by the R, but not the M line, which is where the M50 is from. I know it's really confusing when it comes to Canon's like mounts and then their camera lenses. Even I get kind of confused sometimes, but as of the recording of this video, they released 3 native EFS mount lenses, while the M50 Mark II had a total of 8 native lenses that were first party and worked directly with the M50. One thing I want to add to this is that I read several articles that with a Canon's new RF mount, you're going to be able to use RF and RFS lenses on basically crop cameras and full frame cameras. So basically the full frame and the crop sensor lenses are going to work on both full frame and crop sensor mirrorless cameras. I don't know exactly. From what I hear, basically how it's gonna work is that if you're putting a crop sensor on top a full frame, it's gonna automatically add a crop or something like that. It's so confusing sometimes. Like, man. It's really confusing. But apparently they're gonna release an update for that, but no announcement has been made thus far for that. So we'll see what happens when we get there. So let's talk about size and weight difference between the cameras. The R50 is 116.3 by 85.5 by 68.8 millimeters at 375 grams, while the M50 Mark II is 116.3 by 88.1 by 58.7 millimeters at 387 grams. So the R50 is a little bit lighter than the M50, and the dimensions are a little bit different between the two. But I do notice that with the M50, the grip part, at least on the grip, it is a little bit different from the M50. So before, when I had the M6, as you know, the M6 is in the same line as the M50. It came out before the M50. I'm getting like the same vibe from the M6 compared to the R50. Now, not in the sense that it's more like heavier duty, but the grip is noticeably smaller on the R50 R50. When I got the M50, the grip feels much more nicer on the M50. I just gotta say that. The R50 seems a little bit smaller, so even I have small hands, it doesn't feel as nice as the M50. So keep that in mind. Overall, I think the builds for both cameras, the M50 and the R50, are really, really solid. I do like what they did here on the R50, where they kind of removed a lot of the rubber grip in terms of the front part here, where the buttons are, because they tend to, you know, that rubber part tend to like come off near the buttons. On my M50 right now, like the rubber part is kind of coming off, and it's kind of ugly just from looking at it, but I'm glad they kind of like fixed it in this part right here. It's more just plastic and then rubber here and then rubber on the grip, which really that's where you need it. Great on Canon for that. So let's get into the price difference between these cameras. So as of the recording of this video, the R50 is sitting at $800, and that comes with the body and then the kit lens of the 85 to 45. As of the recording this video, the M50 Mark II is at $599. That's the body and the kit lens. So there's only really a $200 difference between these cameras. At the end of the day, that's still $200. So the price difference is really gonna vary per person. Like, are they willing to put in the extra $200 for the latest tech, essentially, for, you know, Canon's mirrorless cameras compared to the M50? And honestly, that will be up to you. I'll give more of my thoughts at the end of this video, so stay tuned. So next up, we have the battery. So with the M50, I've talked about this plenty of times, but the M50's batteries just do not last that long. I've used it pretty extensively for the past couple years, and that's one of the weaker points about the M50, and thus why I have a battery grip on it. Ever since I got the battery grip, that thing has been on top of my camera for the longest of time, and I never have to worry about battery anymore. And in fact, I'm recording this with my M50 and it's on the battery grip right now, and I don't remember when I last charged it, and that should be a good thing. The Canon R50 is rated at 310 shots at the low end and 440 shots at the high end using the LPE17 batteries, while the M50 Mark II is rated at 250 shots and 305 shots at the high end using the LPE12. So there is quite a bit of a difference between the amount of shots you can take between the two cameras. But again, once you add the battery grip to the M50, like, this is completely irrelevant at this point. 200 shots, I can go on for like thousands and thousands of shots at that point. And hopefully at some point we get a R50 battery grip, and that this won't even be relevant anymore. In terms of video too, the battery life is great when it comes to video on the battery grip. So hopefully they make that, but those are the amount of shots that you can take. I don't have enough testing to compare the amount of time they can shoot video, but even then, they're kind of capped out at 30 minutes on the M50 and then 1 hour on the R50, or until your battery dies on the R50, whatever comes first. The R50 actually still has the pop-up flash here that the M50 had, which is really great, and sometimes I forget that the M50 and the R50 even have this, so there it is again. But one thing that they removed in the R50, which I think is kind of a bummer that they did, is that they removed the hot shoe. So now you actually have to buy a separate attachment to put on here so that you can have hot shoe features. Now it may just have been a cutting cost measure. They want, they know that most beginners won't be using the hot shoe for anything, and even in my everyday I don't use it for very much things. But for those who actually want to use it, they're gonna have to buy an additional attachment, which I think kind of sucks, but then I kind of get why they would do this. But that's just one thing you guys gotta know: no hot shoe on the R50. You gotta buy it separately. So now this kind of begs the question, which one should you buy? Should you just buy the cheaper M50 Mark II, which has been the #1 Canon camera for years now, or the new R50, which has all the new bells and whistles that Canon basically has, the latest Canon tech? Which one should you buy? I know this is gonna be a very cop-out answer, but I have to say it depends. But I'm gonna go into a couple things that you want to consider between the two cameras that will help you make a better decision for you. So the deciding factors, at least in my mind, when it comes to deciding which one you want to get, is going to be #1, the price. #2 is if you're gonna want to get into the entire Canon RF ecosystem, and #3, if any of the improvements sway you to either direction. So let's kind of break down a little bit of that. The price, obviously, that's really important, especially now where inflation kind of hurts your wallet sometimes. The R50 is $800, and if you do want to have access to the other older lenses that you may have, so like the EF and EFS lens, lenses, you can buy a lens adapter, which I have right here. So this guy right here allows you to adapt your old like EF and EFS lenses onto the R50. So if you're someone who already has existing lenses from like DSLRs, although I'd say you want to make sure that it's going to be compatible with this. So if you already have existing lenses, then this is great. It will cost you a little bit more to buy one of these. These are about like $150, I believe. I'll have it linked down in this description below. But when you have this, essentially opens up the entire EF and EFS lens selection that they have out there, which is pretty extensive at this point. You can go for the first party Canon ones, or you can go third party like Sigma or Tamron. But then at that point, it'll easily bring your price tag for the R50 up to $1,000. Now on the flip side, for the M50 Mark II, you'll be paying about $600 USD, which is honestly not that bad for a camera that can do already so much. And it's been tried and tested for the longest of time. For years, the M50 and the M50 Mark II have been Canon's, you know, #1 camera for beginners. And I'll still say to this day, if you want to get into cameras, a M50 is a great place to start. And that brings me to my next point, is the Canon RF system. So with Canon releasing all their R cameras like the R7, the R10, the R50, and basically anything with an R in front, they are starting to bring you into like the R ecosystem. And what they mean by that is like the R cameras with the R lenses, right? You have the RF mount lenses and the RFS ones that they recently announced, and then they have all their RF mount cameras. It's so confusing sometimes. If you want to get sucked into that ecosystem, then great, because they actually do sell a lens adapter that allows you to use older like EF lenses. So like I said, if you already have EF or EFS lenses, then it's like a pretty good deal to just buy a lens adapter and you can use all your old lenses. Granted, it doesn't have all the newest technology, but at the end of the day, you know, if you can work with the old technology and not have all the cool bells and whistles of the new ones, then why not just stick with the old ones, right? And last thing I want to touch on is all the little improvements that the R50 makes. Like if shooting in 4K is really important to you, then I'd say go for the R50, because the M50 just has a 4K that is used for very specific situations. And if you're really shooting 4K, then R50 would be the way to go. If the autofocus is something that you really want, then go for the R50. But if you're someone who's just getting into cameras and you just want to kind of try out, you know, using mirrorless cameras, then I think the M50 Mark II is great for you, because I still gotta say, the M50 is such a good camera that I almost in some cases would recommend people go for the M50 first. And if you really like the M50, upgrade to the R50, because at some point the R cameras are going to be the main cameras that you're going to want to buy, just because they have all the new lenses and whatnot. But at the end of the day, like, I'm still using the M50. The R50 is actually my brother's, but then I do use it from time to time. I love using this too. It's so cool. It is super fun to use a newer camera. But if you really just want something that takes great photos and great video, but isn't your smartphone, the M50 is once again the way to go. But I want to hear from you guys. Do you guys have the R50? Did you upgrade from the M50 to the R50? Let me know your guys' thoughts and opinions on it so far. And if you have the M50, why aren't you moving up to the R50? And vice versa. Just start a conversation in the comment section below. I can't wait to see you guys there. And if you just bought the R50 and you want to learn how to use it more, I made a playlist called the Canon R50 User's Guide. I'll have it on screen right now or linked down in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I appreciate all your support. And until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.